Julian glanced at himself in the rearview mirror. His dark, slightly wavy hair was perfectly styled, and his sharp blue eyes sparkled with excitement. His black tuxedo fit him like a glove, the crisp white shirt beneath contrasting elegantly. Today was the day, his wedding day, the day his life would transform into a picture-perfect union of wealth, status, and love. Or so he thought. The sun burned brightly over the city of Charleston, its golden rays reflecting off the polished glass of high-rises and shimmering in the blue expanse of the harbor. The city bustled with life. Cars honked, laughter spilled from cafe patios, and the aroma of freshly baked bread lingered in the air. But for Julian Hart, the world seemed to blur as he drove through it, his thoughts entirely consumed by the moment ahead. He reached over to his passenger seat where a leather-bound notebook sat. It contained the vows he had painstakingly written over weeks. His heart raced as he imagined Vivian Hale, his stunning fiancée, walking down the aisle in a gown that was likely as extravagant as her personality. She had insisted on a venue adorned with imported orchids, champagne fountains, and a choir to serenade them. "Julian," she had said with her characteristic sharpness during the planning, "this will be the wedding of the decade. Everything must be perfect. No excuses." A small smile tugged at his lips. Vivian had always been demanding, but he attributed it to her passion for the finer things in life, a passion they both shared. After all, she was the kind of woman who turned heads in every room, who never settled for anything less than extraordinary. She was the perfect match for him, or so everyone said. His phone buzzed, breaking his train of thought. He hesitated, but glanced down. "Vivienne." He sighed. "She's probably asking where I am," he muttered, hitting the answer button. "Julian, where are you?" Her voice rang out, clipped with irritation. "The guests are arriving. I'm at the church, and everything is ready except the groom." "I'm on my way, Vivian," he replied calmly, keeping his hands steady on the wheel. Traffic was heavier than I expected. "Traffic!" she exclaimed, the sharpness in her tone enough to make him wince. "This is not some charity gala you can stroll into late, Julian. It's our wedding. Do you even care about how this makes me look?" "Vivian, I'll be there," he said firmly, though his jaw tightened. "I'm not far." "You'd better not keep me waiting. I've invested too much in this day for it to fall apart because of you." Her words hung in the air even after the call ended abruptly. Julian's grip on the wheel tightened, his earlier smile fading. He told himself she was just stressed. Weddings were chaotic, and Vivienne was always intense under pressure. Still, her words carried a sting he couldn't shake. Ahead, the light turned green. Julian pressed the accelerator, weaving between cars. His mind wandered back to the life awaiting him after the ceremony. A life of cocktail parties, luxurious vacations, and a partnership that, while not perfect, would cement them as Charleston's most enviable couple. But fate had other plans. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. Julian glanced down briefly, just for a second, to read Vivian's terse message. "Don't ruin this day." That was all it took. A truck roared into the intersection from the side street, its brakes screaming. Julian's eyes shot up, his heart seizing in his chest as he jerked the wheel. Tires screeched, metal crunched. The world spun violently before fading into a suffocating darkness. Across town, in the quiet corridors of Charleston General Hospital, Celeste Marlowe carefully wiped down a tray of medical instruments. The faint scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, blending with the muted beeps of monitors and the occasional hurried footsteps of nurses. Her dark, wavy hair was tied back loosely, a few strands framing her face. She wore a simple navy uniform, a stark contrast to the immaculate, opulent attire she imagined the patients she served once wore. Celeste wasn't one to complain about her work. It was honest, steady, and more than she had hoped for when she arrived in Charleston 2 years ago. Yet, as she finished her task, she couldn't ignore the small ache in her chest. Another long day spent cleaning rooms, yet always invisible. The sound of rushed voices pulled her from her thoughts. A gurney wheeled by, flanked by EMTs and doctors barking orders. She caught a glimpse of the patient, a man, blood trickling down his forehead, his features sharp, despite the pallor of his face. His suit was torn, but she noticed its fine fabric. He must be important, she thought briefly. "Get him stabilized," one of the nurses shouted. Celeste stood frozen, her eyes lingering on the man as he was wheeled into a trauma room. She didn't know why, but something about him struck her. Maybe it was the contrast between his disheveled state and the life of privilege his suit hinted at. Or maybe it was the way his face, even in unconsciousness, seemed filled with a silent pain she couldn't place. "Come on, Celeste," she muttered to herself, shaking off the moment. She picked up her cleaning supplies and moved down the hall. At the church, Vivienne paced near the altar, her pristine gown trailing behind her. The guests whispered among themselves, glancing at their watches. The pastor approached cautiously, his voice low and apologetic. "Ms. Hale, it's been nearly an hour. Should we—" "No!" Vivienne snapped, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Julian will be here. He wouldn't dare ruin this." But her face betrayed her growing unease. The weight of the guests' judgment was unbearable. She clenched her fists, her perfectly manicured nails biting into her palms. Finally, her phone buzzed. Relief surged through her as she answered. "Julian, where are you? Do you have any idea—" "This is Charleston General Hospital," a voice interrupted. "Are you a relation to Julian Hart?" Vivienne's breath caught. "Hospital? What's happened?" "He's been in an accident. He's in critical condition. You should come immediately." Her phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Vivienne's composure shattered. She didn't move, frozen in place, as the perfect image she had built for herself began to crack. Hours later, in the dimly lit hospital room, Julian lay unconscious, machines beeping softly around him. Celeste stood just outside the doorway, holding a bouquet of fresh lilies she had been about to arrange in another patient's room. She lingered, unsure why she felt compelled to stop. He seemed so fragile now, so far removed from the polished man she had glimpsed earlier. Celeste's chest tightened. It wasn't pity that kept her there, it was something else, something she couldn't explain. Taking a cautious step forward, she set the lilies on the small table beside his bed. "You'll need these," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Even in the darkest places, beauty can grow." Her words hung in the air, carried by the faint hum of the machines. And though Julian remained still, as if locked in an endless dream somewhere deep within, a flicker of warmth began to stir. The hospital corridors were unnervingly quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping of machines and the occasional muffled chatter of nurses passing by. Celeste Marlowe moved carefully, her cleaning cart trailing behind her. She had spent the better part of her day scrubbing floors and disinfecting surfaces, trying to keep herself distracted from the fleeting image of the unconscious man wheeled in earlier. It wasn't her business. She told herself this over and over. Patients came and went every day. Some she noticed, some she didn't. But something about him stayed with her. It wasn't his fine suit or his chiseled features, though those were hard to ignore. It was the sadness etched into his still expression, the kind of sadness that clung to the edges of people who seemed to have it all. "Celeste," a nurse called out, startling her from her thoughts. "We need you in room 314 after this. Dr. Wells wants everything spotless." Dr. Serafina Wells. Celeste respected her. The neurosurgeon was known for her sharp intellect and unwavering dedication, though her no-nonsense attitude intimidated most of the staff. "Got it," Celeste replied, adjusting her gloves. As she pushed her cart toward the next room, she passed the doorway to the patient she couldn't stop thinking about, Julian Hart. His name was on the chart hanging by the door. She had read it earlier, lingering longer than she should have. She glanced around. No one was watching. With a mix of hesitance and curiosity, she stepped inside. Julian lay motionless, his face pale against the stark white pillow. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the machines monitoring his vitals. Celeste stood there for a moment, her heart tightening. She didn't know him, but she felt the overwhelming urge to say something, anything. Taking a step closer, she whispered, "I hope you wake up soon. Someone's waiting for you, I think." Her voice was soft, trembling slightly. She didn't know where the words came from, but the thought of him lying there alone was unbearable. She wanted to believe that someone out there truly cared about him, someone who wasn't just angry about a ruined wedding. Suddenly, the sound of heels clicking against the linoleum floor startled her. Celeste hurriedly stepped back, grabbing her cart as a tall, statuesque woman swept into the room. Vivian Hale. Her blonde hair was immaculate, every strand in place, and her tailored white dress was as crisp as if she'd just stepped out of a boutique. She carried herself with an air of entitlement, the kind that made everyone in her presence shrink. "Julian," Vivian said, her voice tight, almost annoyed. She stood at the foot of the bed, her arms crossed. "You just had to ruin everything, didn't you? The wedding, the plans, the—" She trailed off, glancing at the machines as if they might answer her questions. Celeste froze, gripping the edge of her cart. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but she couldn't move. Vivian sighed, her frustration evident. Do you know how embarrassing it was to explain to everyone? To tell them the groom wasn't coming because he was in an accident? They were all looking at me like it was my fault. And now I'm here, stuck waiting for you to wake up. It's not fair, Julian." Her words hung in the air like a bad smell. Celeste's chest tightened. How could someone be so cold? Vivian tapped her manicured nails against the side of the bed, her gaze flicking toward the doorway. Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up without hesitation. "Damien," she said, her voice softening immediately. "Yes, I'm still at the hospital. No, I don't know how long I'll stay. This is all such a mess." Celeste's stomach churned. She had heard enough. Quietly, she wheeled her cart out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't understand how someone who was supposed to love Julian could speak about him like he was an inconvenience. As she turned the corner, she nearly collided with a tall figure. Papers scattered to the floor, and she stumbled back, mortified. "Whoa, easy there," a calm voice said. Looking up, Celeste saw Dr. Serafina Wells. The doctor knelt to pick up the papers, her sharp eyes scanning Celeste with a hint of curiosity. "I'm so sorry, Doctor." "Wells," Celeste stammered, fumbling to help. "I wasn't looking where I was going." "It's fine," Serafina said, her tone brisk but not unkind. She stood, smoothing her lab coat. "You're Celeste, right? The one who always leaves fresh flowers in patient rooms?" Celeste nodded, surprised. "Yes, ma'am." Serafina's gaze softened, if only slightly. "Good instinct. People underestimate how much a small gesture can mean." "Thank you," Celeste murmured, unsure of what else to say. Serafina's expression turned serious. "Julian Hart, you've been in his room." Celeste's breath hitched. She didn't know if it was a question or an accusation. Yes, just for a moment. I didn't mean—" "Relax," Serafina said, cutting her off. "I'm not reprimanding you. I just noticed the flowers, and I noticed her." Celeste blinked. "Her?" "Vivian Hale," Serafina said, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I've seen her kind before. They visit out of obligation, not care. Julian needs someone who genuinely cares. The words hit Celeste like a bolt of lightning. She didn't know what to say. Serafina's sharp gaze lingered on her for a moment before the doctor nodded slightly and walked away. That evening, as the hospital settled into a quieter rhythm, Celeste found herself drawn back to Julian's room. She didn't go inside this time, but she stood just outside the doorway, peering in. He was still there, still unmoving, but something about his presence felt significant, like she was meant to be there, even if she didn't fully understand why. "Why do you keep coming here?" a voice said behind her, startling her. She turned to see Dr. Serafina standing a few feet away, arms crossed. "I don't know," Celeste admitted. "It's like he shouldn't be alone." Serafina studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "He's not just a man in a coma, you know. He's someone who's going to wake up one day and need answers. Maybe you'll be the one to give him some hope." Celeste looked back at Julian, her heart pounding. Could that really be true? Meanwhile, in another part of the hospital, Vivian stood in a quiet hallway, her phone pressed to her ear. "I'm tired of waiting, Damien," she said, her voice low and sharp. "If he doesn't wake up soon, I'll have to make some decisions. I'm not built to sit around and play the doting fiancé." On the other end, Damien Thornfield chuckled. "You deserve better than this, Vivian. We both know that. Julian will understand when the time comes." Vivian smirked. "He'll have to." The shadows of their conversation deepened as the night crept on. Night blanketed the city as Charleston General Hospital settled into an uneasy calm. The faint hum of machines and the low murmur of nurses at their stations filled the air. But for Celeste Marlowe, the night seemed heavier than usual. She stood in the corner of the break room, clutching a steaming cup of tea, her thoughts consumed by the image of Julian Hart lying motionless in that sterile room. Her break was nearly over, but she hadn't touched her tea. Instead, she stared into it, her mind replaying fragments of what she had seen and heard that day. Vivian's cold words, the fleeting kindness in Dr. Serafina Wells' expression, and the stillness of Julian's face. A stillness that somehow felt louder than any noise in the hospital. "Celeste," a voice interrupted, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to see Sarah, another cleaner, peeking in from the doorway. "You've got room 314 next, right?" Celeste nodded, setting her cup down. "Yeah, I'll head there now." "Don't let the fiancé scare you off," Sarah joked, though her tone carried a hint of unease. "That one's intense." Celeste forced a small smile and grabbed her cleaning cart. As she made her way to Julian's room, her heart quickened. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the weight of everything, the sadness that seemed to seep from his presence, or the gnawing guilt that she cared too much about a man she didn't know. She paused at the door, steadying her breath before pushing it open. The room was dim, illuminated only by the soft glow of the machines. Julian lay as he always did, his face peaceful but distant. She stepped inside, careful not to disturb the silence. Her hands worked automatically as she straightened the room, wiping down surfaces and adjusting the blanket at the foot of the bed. But her eyes kept drifting back to him, as if he might open his eyes at any moment and catch her staring. "Good evening, Mr. Hart," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. "I hope today was kind to you." She let out a quiet laugh at her own words. It was silly, talking to someone who couldn't respond, but it felt necessary. As she placed a fresh vase of lilies on the small table beside him, her fingers brushed the edge of a photo frame. She picked it up, her curiosity getting the better of her. The photo showed Julian standing next to Vivian, both of them dressed impeccably, their smiles dazzling but strangely hollow. "You must have thought she was everything," Celeste murmured, setting the frame back down. But maybe there's more to life than just perfect smiles and perfect plans. She paused, feeling a pang of regret. It wasn't her place to judge. Who was she to know their story? As she adjusted the flowers, her hand brushed against his. It was unintentional, but the contact sent a jolt through her. His skin was warm, softer than she expected. For a moment, she let her hand linger, her breath hitching. "I don't know if you can hear me," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But if you can, don't give up. The world might feel far away right now, but it's waiting for you. You're not alone." Her words hung in the air, fragile and fleeting. She stepped back, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and quickly finished tidying the room. As she turned to leave, she glanced over her shoulder one last time. He looked just as still as ever, but something in the room felt lighter. Hours later, Vivian strode into Julian's room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She carried a leather bag over one arm and a frown on her face. "You look the same," she muttered, setting her bag on the chair. No surprise there. She sat beside him, crossing her legs and scrolling through her phone. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional buzz of a message. After a few minutes, she sighed dramatically. "I don't know why I keep coming," she said aloud, though she wasn't talking to Julian. "It's not like you're going to wake up any time soon. And Damien says I shouldn't waste my time. Maybe he's right." Her phone buzzed again, and she answered it immediately. "Hello? Yes, Damien. I'm still here. I know what you're going to say. No, I haven't made a decision yet." Her voice softened as she spoke, a tone she never used around Julian. "I just need more time. It's complicated. Yes, of course I care about him. But this situation, it's impossible." As her conversation continued, the door creaked open. Dr. Serafina Wells entered, her sharp eyes sweeping over the room. Vivian hastily ended her call, standing to greet her. "Doctor," Vivian said, her tone clipped. "Any updates?" Serafina raised an eyebrow. "No significant changes. These things take time." Vivian huffed. "Well, I hope it doesn't take too much longer. Some of us have lives to get back to." Serafina's gaze hardened. Mr. Hart is fighting a battle that requires more than just time. He needs support. Genuine support. Vivian stiffened. "Are you implying I don't care?" "I'm stating what I observe," Serafina replied calmly, but her words carried an edge. "Not everyone who walks through that door does so for the right reasons." Vivian's jaw tightened. "You don't know me." "I don't need to," Serafina said. "Actions speak louder than words." Without another glance, Serafina turned and left the room, leaving Vivian seething. She grabbed her bag and stormed out moments later, her anger echoing in her sharp footsteps. The next morning, Celeste found herself back in Julian's room, her hands busy as she arranged the lilies. She didn't speak this time, though her mind swirled with thoughts of the previous night. She had overheard fragments of Vivian's conversation and couldn't shake the bitterness in her tone. As she adjusted the blanket at the foot of the bed, she thought she saw Julian's fingers twitch. She froze, her heart pounding. "Mr. Hart," she whispered, stepping closer, but he remained still. She sighed, shaking her head. Wishful thinking. Still, she couldn't ignore the faint flutter of hope that had ignited in her chest. She glanced at the lilies one last time before leaving the room, her steps lighter than before. In another corner of the hospital, Serafina sat in her office, reviewing Julian's charts. Something about his case nagged at her, a feeling she couldn't quite place. She closed the file and leaned back in her chair, her mind drifting to the cleaner who seemed to care more for Julian than his own fiancée. "Maybe she's the key," Serafina murmured to herself. Maybe she'll be the one who gets through to him. Her words lingered as she gazed out the window, the morning light spilling into her office like a quiet promise. The soft hum of fluorescent lights filled Julian Hart's room as the morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting pale streaks across the walls. Celeste Marlowe stood at the foot of his bed, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the blanket she had just straightened. She had been assigned this room for days now, yet each visit felt heavier. It wasn't the work, it was him. The stillness, the unspoken weight that seemed to hang in the air around Julian. Her hand lingered, her voice caught somewhere in her chest. She wanted to speak to him again, but doubt clawed at her. Did it matter? Could he hear her? She stared at him, willing him to move, to blink, to show even the faintest sign of life. "You must be exhausted lying there like that," she whispered, her voice trembling as she broke the silence. "But if you're listening, just know that someone is rooting for you, even if it's just me." Her words hung in the air, fragile and vulnerable. She hadn't meant to say it. She flushed, embarrassed by her own boldness, and turned quickly toward the door. She barely took a step before hearing the creak of the door swinging open. Startled, she looked up to see Dr. Serafina Wells entering, her sharp gaze flicking between Celeste and Julian. Serafina's expression softened slightly when she saw Celeste, but remained tinged with curiosity. "Celeste," Serafina said, her tone measured, "you've been spending a lot of time here." Celeste's cheeks burned. I was just finishing up," she stammered, clutching her cleaning supplies. "I didn't mean to—" "Relax," Serafina interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to reprimand you. In fact, I think it's good someone's here for him." Celeste hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Serafina moved closer to Julian's bedside, studying his vitals on the monitor. "Mr. Hart's condition is stable, but recovery from something like this isn't just physical," Serafina said, her voice softer now. "Sometimes the mind needs as much care as the body. That's where people like you come in." "Me?" Celeste asked, startled. "Yes, you," Serafina replied, her tone firm. "I've seen how you look at him, how you talk to him. You might not realize it, but those small gestures, the flowers, the words, they can make a difference." Celeste swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "I just don't like seeing someone left alone." "Then don't stop," Serafina said simply, turning back toward the door. "He needs people who care. Keep doing what you're doing, and who knows, maybe it'll be the push he needs." Across town, in the polished lounge of a private club, Vivian Hale sat across from Damien Thornfield. The space oozed luxury from the marble tabletops to the velvet chairs, but Vivian's mind was elsewhere. She stirred her martini absent-mindedly, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the glass. "You seem distracted," Damien said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. His dark eyes glinted with curiosity. Vivian sighed, swirling her drink. "It's this whole situation with Julian. It's complicated." "Complicated?" Damien repeated, his tone laced with mock sympathy. "Vivian, the man's been in a coma for weeks. How much longer are you going to put your life on hold for someone who may never wake up?" His words were blunt, and they cut through Vivian's defenses like a blade. She looked up sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Julian isn't just someone. He's my fiancé." "Is he?" Damien asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you're more interested in appearances than love." Vivian's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Damien countered, leaning forward. "You've spent more time complaining about the wedding being postponed than you have worrying about his recovery. Admit it, Vivian, you don't want to be stuck playing nursemaid, and you shouldn't have to." Vivian's throat tightened as Damien's words settled over her. She hated how accurate they felt, hated the way he saw through her so easily. But more than that, She hated the growing part of her that agreed with him. "What are you saying, Damien?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying you deserve better," Damien said smoothly, his voice like silk. "Someone who's here now, someone who understands you, someone like me." Vivian's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to deny him, to push him away, but his words ignited something within her, a dangerous spark she wasn't sure she could extinguish. Back at the hospital, Celeste sat on a bench in the staff lounge, staring at her phone. She had planned to call her mother to share a piece of home, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself scrolling aimlessly, her thoughts drifting back to Julian. "Everything okay?" Sarah's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Celeste looked up to see her co-worker standing nearby, concern etched on her face. "Yeah, just thinking," Celeste replied, forcing a smile. Sarah sat down beside her, lowering her voice. "It's about him, isn't it? The patient in 314. Celeste hesitated, then nodded. "I can't explain it, Sarah. It's like I feel drawn to him, like I'm supposed to help him somehow." Sarah tilted her head, her expression softening. "Maybe you are. People find their purpose in the strangest places, you know." Celeste laughed quietly, though it lacked humor. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just imagining things." "Either way," Sarah said, squeezing Celeste's hand, "don't ignore it. Sometimes the things that scare us the most are the things that matter the most." Celeste nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her thoughts. As Sarah walked away, Celeste's resolve hardened. She didn't know what this connection meant, but she couldn't turn away from it. Later that evening, Vivian returned to the hospital, her heels echoing down the hallway. Her face was a mask of calm, but her eyes betrayed a storm brewing beneath the surface. She pushed open the door to Julian's room, her gaze immediately landing on the lilies by his bedside. "Fresh flowers," she muttered, a hint of disdain in her voice. "How quaint." She sat down beside Julian, smoothing her dress as she leaned forward. "Julian, if you can hear me, I need you to wake up. Soon. This waiting, it's unbearable." Her voice cracked slightly, though whether from frustration or guilt she didn't know. She took his hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. "You owe me, Julian," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "You owe me a life, a perfect life. So don't you dare leave me here to clean up this mess alone." She stayed there for a moment, her breath uneven, before standing abruptly and leaving the room without a backward glance. From the corner of the hallway, Celeste watched Vivian go, her chest tightening. She had overheard enough to feel the weight of Vivian's words, the selfishness that dripped from them. But she didn't step forward, didn't confront her. Instead, she turned back to Julian's room, her footsteps quiet as she entered. The lilies glowed softly in the moonlight streaming through the window. Celeste approached the bed, her hand trembling as she reached for Julian's. "I don't know what you're going through," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears pooling in her eyes. "But you're stronger than this. I believe in you, Julian, even if no one else does." As her fingers brushed his, she felt a faint twitch, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Her breath caught, her heart pounding. "Julian," she whispered, leaning closer. But he remained still, his features unchanged. She let out a shaky breath, her emotions a whirlwind of hope and doubt. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. "And the day after that. I won't give up on you." She turned and left the room, the sound of her footsteps fading into the quiet night. The dim glow of the hospital monitors cast long, flickering shadows across Julian Hart's room. The air was thick with the quiet hum of machinery and the faint scent of antiseptic. Night had fallen, and most of the hospital staff had retreated to the solace of their routines. But Celeste Marlowe stood in the doorway, hesitating. Her hands trembled as they gripped the edge of her cleaning cart, and her heart pounded with an urgency she couldn't explain. This wasn't part of her job. She knew that. Yet here she was, drawn back to room 314 like a moth to a flame. Something about Julian, the way he seemed trapped between this world and the next, gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something or someone. Steeling herself, she stepped inside, letting the door close softly behind her. She left the cart by the wall and moved to the side of the bed, her gaze locking onto his face. His features were calm, almost serene, but the faint lines around his eyes told a different story. A story of pain, of struggle, of a life interrupted. "Good evening, Mr. Hart," she said softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "It's just me again. I hope you don't mind." She pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. For a moment she hesitated. What could she possibly say to someone who couldn't respond? Yet the words came anyway, unbidden and raw. "I've been thinking about you," she admitted, her cheeks flushing at the confession. "Not in a weird way, I mean. It's just, you seem like someone who has so much left to do, someone who isn't ready to leave this world." Her eyes dropped to his hand, resting limply on the bed. She reached out, hesitating for a moment before lightly brushing her fingers against his. The warmth of his skin startled her, as if it was proof that he was still fighting, still holding on. "I wish I could help you," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I wish I knew what you needed to wake up." As she spoke, a faint sound broke the stillness. Her breath hitched as she glanced toward Julian's face. His lips twitched just slightly, and a soft groan escaped him. Celeste froze, her heart racing. "Julian," she whispered, leaning closer. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, the smallest of movements, but enough to send a jolt of hope through her. She grabbed his hand, holding it tightly as she spoke again. "It's okay. You're safe," she said, her voice steady despite the tears pooling in her eyes. "Take your time. Just don't stop. Keep fighting." The monitor beside the bed beeped more rapidly, and her pulse quickened. She turned toward the door, her instincts telling her to call for help. But before she could move, the door creaked open. Dr. Serafina Wells stepped inside, her sharp eyes immediately scanning the scene. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone brisk but tinged with curiosity. "He moved," Celeste said breathlessly, stepping back to give Serafina space. "I think he's waking up." Serafina strode to the bedside, her hands quick and methodical as she checked Julian's vitals. The faintest hint of a smile tugged at her lips as she noted the changes on the monitor. "It's a good sign," she said, glancing at Celeste. "He's responding. That's progress." Celeste's shoulders sagged with relief, and she pressed a hand to her chest, her heart still racing. "Do you think he'll wake up soon?" Serafina's gaze softened. "It's hard to say. Recovery isn't always linear, but this is a step in the right direction." For a moment, the two women stood in silence, the tension in the room easing slightly. Then Serafina turned to Celeste, her expression thoughtful. "You've been spending a lot of time here," she said, her tone gentle but probing. "Why?" Celeste hesitated, unsure how to put her feelings into words. I feel like he shouldn't be alone," she said finally. "It's hard to explain, but I think he can hear me. And if there's even a chance that it helps him." Serafina studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Keep talking to him. Sometimes a familiar voice can be the difference between waking up and staying lost." Celeste nodded, a mix of hope and determination swelling in her chest. As Serafina left the room, Celeste turned back to Julian, her fingers lightly brushing his hand again. "You hear that?" she said, her voice soft but steady. "You're making progress. Don't stop now." Meanwhile, in another part of the hospital, Vivian Hale paced the length of the waiting room, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. Her phone buzzed incessantly, but she ignored it, too consumed by her own frustration to care. Damien Thornfield lounged in one of the chairs, his posture relaxed, but his eyes watchful. He had come to check on her, though his motives were anything but altruistic. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," Damien drawled, his lips curling into a smirk. "Why don't you sit down and relax?" "Relax?" Vivian snapped, whirling to face him. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? My life is on hold because Julian refuses to wake up. Do you know how many opportunities I've missed because of this mess?" Damien raised an eyebrow. "Opportunities? Or excuses?" Vivian's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're not stuck here, Vivian," Damien said, his tone smooth and calculated. "You're choosing to stay. And for what? A man who may never be the same?" Vivian's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Damien rose from his chair, stepping closer until his voice was low and intimate. "You deserve more than this," he said, his words like poison laced with honey. "You deserve someone who sees you, someone who can give you the life you want. Not this endless waiting." For a moment, Vivian wavered, the weight of his words sinking into her skin like claws. She hated how much sense he made, hated the way his voice stirred something inside her. But before she could respond, a nurse entered the waiting room, her expression tense. "Ms. Hale," the nurse said, glancing between Vivian and Damien. "Mr. Hart's condition is improving. You may want to see him." Vivian's eyes widened, her heart lurching in her chest. "He's waking up?" The nurse hesitated. "Not fully, but he's showing signs of response. It's a good sign." Vivian turned on her heel, her frustration forgotten as she hurried toward Julian's room. Damien followed, his expression unreadable. When Vivian entered the room, she found Celeste standing by the bed, her hand still resting lightly on Julian's. Her presence was an affront, a reminder of everything Vivian wanted to ignore. "What are you doing here?" Vivian demanded, her voice sharp. Celeste stepped back, startled. You were just overstepping," Vivian snapped, cutting her off. "This isn't your place. Go do your job somewhere else." Celeste's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. "I was just trying to help." Vivian's lips curled into a sneer. "Help? By playing nursemaid to a man you don't even know? How pathetic." "That's enough," a calm but firm voice interrupted. Both women turned to see Doctor. Serafina Wells standing in the doorway, her expression steely. "Miss Hale," Serafina said, her tone cold. "Celeste has done nothing but show compassion for Mr. Hart. If you can't do the same, perhaps you should reconsider why you're here." Vivian's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She turned on her heel and stormed out, Damien trailing behind her with a smirk. As the door closed behind them, Celeste let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling. Serafina placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't let her get to you," Serafina said softly. "What you're doing matters." Celeste nodded, her eyes drifting back to Julian. She took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. "I won't give up on him," she said quietly, "no matter what." The faint glow of the early morning sun seeped into room 314, casting golden streaks across the walls. Julian Hart's chest rose and fell steadily. a silent rhythm that spoke of resilience. The world outside was alive. Birds chirped, cars honked, and the hum of life went on. But inside the room, time seemed frozen, locked in the liminal space between waiting and hope. Celeste Marlowe sat in the chair by his bedside, her fingers gripping the edges of a notebook she had brought with her. Her eyes darted to Julian's face, scanning for any sign of movement. He had stirred before, fleeting moments that teased the promise of awakening. She couldn't shake the memory of his lips twitching, or the faint groan that had escaped him. It was as if he was fighting to return, but kept slipping back into the void. "You're so close, Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I can feel it." She glanced at the notebook in her hands, the pages blank except for the first line she had written earlier that morning. "What would you say to someone who saved your life?" It was a question that had haunted her. She didn't know why she felt so connected to Julian, why his struggle felt like her own. But every time she thought of walking away, something held her back, a pull she couldn't ignore. She closed the notebook and placed it on the small table beside the vase of lilies. "I brought this in case you need someone to tell you stories," she said with a soft laugh. "I'm not a great storyteller, but maybe hearing something will help." Her voice faltered, and she looked away, biting her lip. It was hard to talk to him without feeling vulnerable. She wasn't used to opening up, even in one-sided conversations. But Julian's presence demanded honesty, as though he could sense her words, even in his silence. "I know you don't know me," she continued, her voice steadier now. "But I think I've needed someone like you in my life for a long time, someone who reminds me that even when things seem hopeless, there's still a reason to fight." She stopped, her cheeks flushing as she realized how much she had said. She stood abruptly, smoothing her uniform. "I'll let you rest, but I'll be back later, okay?" As she reached for the door, a faint sound stopped her in her tracks. It was a groan, low and strained, but unmistakable. Her heart pounded as she turned back, her eyes wide. "Julian," she whispered, stepping closer to the bed. Did you just—" His fingers twitched so subtly that she almost thought she had imagined it. But then his eyelids fluttered, a small but significant movement that sent a jolt of hope through her. She rushed to the hallway, her voice trembling as she called out, "Dr. Wells! Dr. Wells, he's moving!" Dr. Serafina Wells arrived within moments, her sharp gaze taking in the scene as she checked Julian's vitals. Celeste stood by the door, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, watching with bated breath. "He's responding," Serafina confirmed, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "This is good, Celeste. It's progress." Celeste's knees felt weak with relief. "Do you think he'll wake up soon?" Serafina glanced at her, her expression thoughtful. "It's hard to say. Recovery isn't predictable. But moments like this, they mean something. Keep talking to him. It might help." Later that afternoon, as the hospital buzzed with its usual rhythm, Vivian Hale strode into Julian's room. Her heels clicked against the floor with practiced precision, her face a mask of determination. She carried a sleek leather bag over her shoulder, her every movement calculated and deliberate. She stopped short when she saw Celeste sitting by the bed, her hand resting lightly on Julian's. The sight was an affront, a challenge to the control Vivian so desperately clung to. "What are you doing here?" Vivian demanded, her voice sharp. Celeste flinched but didn't move. You were just overstepping," Vivian snapped, cutting her off. "This isn't your place. Julian is my fiancé, and I don't need a cleaner playing nursemaid." Celeste's face burned with embarrassment and anger, but before she could respond, the door opened again. Damien Thornfield stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the scene with mild amusement. "Well, this is awkward," he drawled, his lips curling into a smirk. Vivian turned to him, her irritation palpable. "Damien, this isn't the time." "Oh, but it is," Damien said, his tone mocking. "You're clearly struggling to keep your emotions in check. Maybe you should let someone else handle things." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "And who would that be?" "You?" Damien chuckled, shaking his head. "Hardly. But it's clear you're out of your depth, Vivian. You don't even want to be here." Vivian's hand tightened around the strap of her bag. "You don't know what I want." "Don't I?" Damien asked, stepping closer. "You want freedom. You want to leave this mess behind. And you want someone to tell you it's okay to walk away." Celeste stood frozen, caught in the middle of the tense exchange. She felt like an intruder, but something about Damien's words struck a chord. She glanced at Julian, her heart aching at the thought of him being abandoned. "Stop," she said quietly, her voice trembling but firm. "This isn't about you. It's about him." Both Vivian and Damien turned to her, their expressions a mix of surprise and disdain. "You don't know him," Vivian said coldly. "You have no right to—" "I don't have to know him," Celeste interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I can see what he needs, and right now he needs someone who believes in him." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line, and without another word she turned and stormed out of the room. Damien lingered for a moment, his smirk fading as he regarded Celeste with something resembling curiosity. "You've got guts," he said finally, before following Vivian out the door. As the day turned to evening, Celeste sat by Julian's bed once more, her resolve stronger than ever. She reached for his hand, holding it gently as she spoke. "I'm not giving up on you, Julian," she said softly. "No matter what anyone else does, I'll be here, every day, as long as it takes." His fingers twitched again, a faint but undeniable response. Tears filled her eyes, a mix of hope and determination flooding her heart. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing with certainty. She wasn't going anywhere. The day began with a quiet tension that seemed to hang in the air of Charleston General Hospital. The sun climbed slowly, casting golden streaks through the blinds of room 314. Julian Hart lay in his bed, his chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm. But today something felt different, like the hum of a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Celeste Marlowe entered the room with a soft knock, even though no one was there to respond. She had learned to tread lightly in this space, respecting its quiet sanctity. In her hands she carried a small bouquet of freshly picked lavender, their fragrance subtle yet calming. She placed the flowers in the vase on the bedside table, replacing the lilies that had begun to wilt. "Morning, Julian," she said softly, as though he might answer. She settled into the chair by his bed, her fingers idly tracing the edge of her notebook. She had started writing in it more often, capturing her thoughts and feelings as though it might help her make sense of the inexplicable pull she felt toward him. "Doctor." "Wells says you're improving," she continued, her voice steady but tinged with hope. "She said every small movement is a step closer to waking up, and I believe her. I believe in you." Her words were met with silence, as always. But today, it didn't feel empty. It felt charged, like something was about to shift. She reached for his hand, her touch light and tentative. "I don't know what's waiting for you when you wake up, but I hope you'll see that you're not alone. Not anymore." As the words left her lips, Julian's fingers twitched beneath her palm. Celeste gasped, her heart leaping in her chest. She leaned closer, searching his face for any sign of awareness. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, a small but unmistakable movement. Celeste's breath caught, tears pooling in her eyes. She pressed the call button on the wall, her voice urgent as she spoke into the intercom. "He's moving," she said, barely able to contain her emotion. "Please, send Dr. Wells." Dr. Serafina Wells arrived within moments, her presence as commanding as ever. She moved to Julian's bedside with practiced efficiency, checking his vitals and monitoring his responses. Celeste stood back, her hands clasped tightly as she watched. "Mr. Hart," Serafina said, her tone calm but firm, "if you can hear me, I need you to try to open your eyes." For a moment, nothing happened. The room was still, the tension palpable. Then, slowly, Julian's eyelids lifted, revealing a pair of glassy, unfocused eyes. He blinked, his gaze darting around the room as though trying to make sense of where he was. "He's waking up," Serafina said, her voice filled with restrained excitement. "Julian, can you hear me? You're in the hospital. You've been in an accident, but you're safe now." Julian's lips parted, and a hoarse sound escaped him, a feeble attempt at speech. Celeste stepped forward instinctively, her heart pounding. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "You don't have to say anything, just take your time." Julian's gaze found hers, and for a fleeting moment, something passed between them. A spark of recognition, though it was faint and fleeting. Celeste's breath hitched as she realized he was seeing her, truly seeing her for the first time. News of Julian's awakening spread quickly through the hospital, and it wasn't long before Vivian Hale arrived, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She swept into the room like a storm, her presence commanding and unmistakable. "Julian," she said, her voice a mix of relief and irritation, "thank God you're awake. Do you have any idea how worried I've been?" Julian's gaze shifted to her, confusion clouding his features. His voice was weak as he tried to speak. "Where am I?" "You're in the hospital," Vivian said quickly, taking his hand in hers. "You were in an accident, but you're okay now. I've been here, waiting for you." Her words were rushed, her tone more rehearsed than genuine. Celeste stood to the side, her heart sinking as she watched the interaction. Vivian's presence felt overwhelming, almost suffocating, and she wondered if Julian felt the same. Julian's brow furrowed, his gaze flicking between Vivian and Celeste. "I remember a voice," he said slowly, his words halting. "A soft voice. Talking to me." Vivian's smile faltered, her grip tightening on his hand. "Of course you do," she said quickly. "It was me. I've been by your side every day." Julian's gaze lingered on her, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Then, slowly, he turned his head towards Celeste. His voice was barely a whisper as he asked, "Was it you?" The question hit Celeste like a thunderbolt. Her heart pounded as she struggled to find her voice. I was here sometimes," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "I didn't want you to feel alone." Vivian's eyes narrowed, her grip on Julian's hand tightening further. "She's just a cleaner, Julian," she said sharply. "Don't be ridiculous." "Vivienne?" Serafina interrupted, her tone cutting through the tension. "This is neither the time nor the place for that." Vivian glared at her but said nothing, her jaw tightening as she stepped back. Celeste could feel the heat of her anger, but she refused to let it intimidate her. Instead, she focused on Julian, her heart swelling with a mix of hope and fear. As the days passed, Julian's recovery continued. He began speaking more, his strength returning little by little. But with each step forward, the tension between Vivian and Celeste grew. Vivian's visits became more frequent, her presence a constant reminder of the life Julian had left behind. And yet, Julian often looked to Celeste, his questions and his gratitude directed toward her. One afternoon, as Celeste prepared to leave his room, Julian called out to her. His voice was still weak, but there was a clarity in it that hadn't been there before. "Celeste," he said, his gaze steady. "Thank you." She paused, her heart catching in her chest. "For what?" "For everything," he said softly. "For being here. For not giving up on me." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, unable to speak. As she left the room, she could feel Vivienne's gaze burning into her back, but she didn't care. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Julian was waking up, not just physically, but emotionally, and with every step he took, Celeste felt herself being drawn closer to him, as though their lives were becoming inextricably intertwined. But she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The storm was far from over, and the battle for Julian's heart had only just begun. The soft hum of the hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly in the background as Julian Hart lay in his bed, his eyes fluttering open slowly. He was awake now, not just physically, but in a way that felt deeper, as though each passing moment brought clarity he hadn't known he needed. Memories flickered in and out of focus, the accident, the darkness, and most vividly, the voice. That soft, steady voice that had anchored him, pulling him back when he'd been on the verge of slipping away. He turned his head slightly, wincing as the muscles in his neck protested. His gaze landed on the vase of lavender on the bedside table, its delicate scent filling the room. His lips parted, his voice hoarse as he spoke to the empty room. "Who put these here?" The door creaked open, and Celeste Marlowe stepped inside, her cleaning cart in tow. She froze when she saw him looking at her, her breath catching in her chest. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice betraying her nerves. "How are you feeling?" Julian's brows furrowed as he studied her, recognition flickering in his eyes. "It's you," he said slowly. "You're the one. You talked to me." Celeste's heart raced, her cheeks flushing. She hesitated, unsure how much to say. "I just didn't want you to feel alone." He blinked, his expression a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "You kept me grounded," he murmured. "Your voice. It felt like the only thing keeping me here." Celeste swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm glad I could help," she said simply, her voice trembling. "You've been fighting so hard, Julian. Everyone's been rooting for you." Before Julian could respond, the door swung open with force, and Vivienne Hale strode in, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. Her perfectly tailored outfit and immaculate makeup made her look more like someone arriving at a business meeting than visiting a recovering fiancé. "Julian!" she exclaimed, rushing to his bedside. "You're awake! Finally!" Julian's eyes darted between Vivienne and Celeste, the stark contrast between the two women making his head spin. Vivienne's presence felt overwhelming, her voice loud and insistent, while Celeste's quiet strength lingered like a comforting shadow. "Vivienne," he said, his voice strained. "What are you doing here?" Her smile faltered, confusion flashing across her face. "What do you mean? I'm your fiancé. Where else would I be?" Julian didn't respond immediately, his gaze drifting to Celeste, who stood awkwardly by the door, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Can you stay?" he asked her softly. Vivienne bristled, her composure slipping. "Julian, she's just a cleaner. She doesn't need to—" "She's the one who was here," Julian interrupted, his voice firmer now. "She's the one who talked to me when I couldn't respond. I want her to stay." Celeste's eyes widened, her heart pounding. She opened her mouth to protest, but the look in Julian's eyes stopped her. He wasn't just asking, he was pleading. "I'll stay if you need me to," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside her. Vivian's jaw tightened, her smile turning brittle. "Fine," she said, her tone icy. "If that's what you want, Julian." She stepped back, crossing her arms as she watched Celeste take a seat beside the bed. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words and simmering emotions. The hours passed slowly, the day slipping into afternoon. Julian dozed off intermittently, his body still weak from the weeks spent in a coma. Celeste remained by his side, her presence quiet but unwavering. Vivian hovered near the window, scrolling through her phone and occasionally glancing at Julian with a mixture of irritation and impatience. When Julian stirred again, he turned to Celeste, his voice soft but clear. "How long was I out?" "Almost a month," Celeste replied, her tone gentle. "But you're making great progress now." He nodded, his brow furrowing as he processed the information. "And you've been here the whole time?" Celeste hesitated, unsure how much to say. "I've been around," she said carefully. "I'm just one of the staff." "Not just," Julian said firmly, his gaze locking onto hers. "You're not just anything. You kept me going." Vivian cleared her throat loudly, drawing their attention. "Julian, I've been here too," she said, her voice tight. "I was at the hospital every day, waiting for you to wake up." Julian's expression flickered with doubt. "Were you?" "Of course I was," Vivian insisted, stepping closer. "This has been a nightmare for me. Do you have any idea how hard it's been, putting everything on hold, not knowing if you'd ever wake up?" Julian's lips pressed into a thin line, his exhaustion evident. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Vivian's smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll get through this together," she said brightly, as though she were willing the words to be true. Later that evening, after Vivian had left, Celeste remained by Julian's side, her presence a quiet balm to the chaos Vivian had stirred. Julian turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Why do you do it?" he asked suddenly. "Stay with me, I mean. You don't have to." Celeste hesitated, searching for the right words. "I guess I know what it feels like to be alone," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I didn't want you to feel that way." Julian studied her, his gaze softening. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying a weight that made Celeste's heart ache. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing second. But even as hope blossomed in Celeste's chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would be anything but smooth. In the dimly lit lounge of an upscale bar, Vivian sat across from Damien Thornfield, her fingers tightening around her glass of wine. Her carefully constructed facade had cracked earlier, and she was still seething. "He barely even acknowledged me," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "That cleaner has him wrapped around her finger." Damien raised an eyebrow, a sly smile playing on his lips. "Maybe you're losing your touch, Vivian." She shot him a glare, her eyes flashing with fury. "I'm not losing anything. Julian is mine, and I'm not going to let some nobody take him away from me." Damien chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Then you'd better act fast, because from what I saw, your fiancé is already looking elsewhere." Vivian's grip tightened on her glass, her resolve hardening. "Let her enjoy her little moment," she said coldly. "Because when I'm done, she won't even have a place in his memories." Damien's smile widened, the glint in his eyes dark and calculating. "Now, that's the Vivian I know." The storm brewing in Vivian's heart was far from over, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to reclaim what she believed was hers. But even as she plotted, the connection between Julian and Celeste grew stronger. a fragile but undeniable bond that no storm could easily break. The rain tapped lightly against the window of Julian Hart's hospital room, the sound a soothing rhythm against the tension that hung heavy in the air. He sat upright now, supported by pillows, his strength slowly returning with each passing day. But the haze of confusion that had clouded his mind since waking remained, and the storm brewing in his heart refused to settle. Across the room, Celeste Marlowe busied herself tidying the small table by his bed. Her movements were quiet, deliberate, but her eyes darted toward Julian every so often, searching for a sign of how he was feeling. His silence today was different, deeper, weightier. She could sense the questions bubbling beneath the surface. "Celeste," Julian said suddenly, his voice soft but steady. She froze, her hand hovering over the vase of lavender. Turning to face him, she saw his gaze fixed on her, his blue eyes sharp and searching. "Yes?" she asked, her own voice laced with hesitation. "Tell me the truth," he said, his words deliberate, his tone unyielding. "How long were you here while I was out?" Celeste's breath hitched. She had expected this question, but not so soon, not when the fragile connection between them felt so precarious. She crossed the room slowly, her hands clasped in front of her, and sat in the chair beside his bed. "Almost every day," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like you shouldn't be alone." Julian leaned back against the pillows, closing his eyes for a moment as if absorbing her words. When he spoke again, his voice was laced with something she couldn't quite place. Gratitude, perhaps, or disbelief. "Why?" he asked simply. Celeste hesitated, her fingers twisting in her lap. "Because I know what it feels like to be forgotten, to feel like no one's there for you, and I didn't want you to go through that." The weight of her words lingered in the air, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Julian's gaze softened as he regarded her, the corners of his lips curving into a faint, almost wistful smile. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice quiet but full of sincerity. "For everything." Celeste's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, her heart pounding. "You don't have to thank me," she murmured. "I'm just glad you're okay." The moment was broken by the sharp sound of heels clicking against the tile floor. Vivian Hale entered the room like a storm, her presence commanding and utterly out of place in the quiet sanctuary Julian and Celeste had created. "Julian," she said brightly, her voice filled with forced cheer, "I just came from speaking with your doctor. She says you're doing so well, we might be able to take you home soon." Julian's expression shifted, his earlier warmth cooling into something guarded. "That's good," he said simply, his tone measured. Vivian's smile faltered, but she pressed on. "And once you're home, we can start making plans again. There's so much to catch up on. Our wedding, the house renovations, everything." Celeste's chest tightened as she watched Julian's jaw clench. The tension between him and Vivian was palpable, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. She rose quietly, grabbing her cleaning supplies. "I should go," she said softly, avoiding Vivian's glare. "No," Julian said suddenly, his voice firm. "Stay." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Julian, don't be ridiculous. She doesn't need to—" "She's been here for me," Julian interrupted, his voice sharp. "More than anyone else." Vivian's face flushed with anger, but she masked it quickly, forcing a tight smile. "Of course she has," she said smoothly. "It's her job, after all." Julian's eyes darkened, and for a moment it seemed as though he might say something more. But instead he looked away, his shoulders slumping slightly. Vivian took the opportunity to sit on the edge of the bed, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "Julian," she said softly, her tone suddenly saccharine. I know things have been hard, but now that you're awake, we can get back to the life we were building together. Everything will be just like it was before. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. Vivienne, he said slowly, his voice tinged with exhaustion. What if I don't want things to be the way they were before? Her smile froze, the edges of it cracking like brittle glass. What are you talking about? I mean, Julian said, his voice gaining strength. Maybe this accident was a wake-up call. Maybe I need to rethink what's really important. Vivian's eyes darted to Celeste, who stood frozen by the door, her face pale. Is this about her? She demanded, her voice rising. You've barely been awake a week, and you're already letting a cleaner— Stop, Julian said sharply, his tone cutting through the room like a knife. This isn't about her. It's about me, and what I want. Vivian's mouth opened and closed, her composure slipping. You're confused, she said finally, her voice trembling. You've been through a lot, Julian. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, he replied, his voice firm. And I need time to figure things out. Alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Finally she stood, her movements stiff and jerky. Fine, she said, her voice cold. If that's what you want. Without another word, she stormed out of the room, the door slamming shut behind her. The sound echoed in the stillness, leaving a void in its wake. Celeste remained frozen by the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if she should leave or stay. Julian's voice broke the silence. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the lavender. You shouldn't have had to see that. You don't have to apologize, Celeste said, her voice soft. It's not my place. Julian looked at her then, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe something deeper. You've been my anchor, he said simply, even when I didn't know it. And I don't want you to feel like you don't belong here, because you do. Her breath caught, her cheeks flushing. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling. That means more than you know. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to still, the rain tapping gently against the window like a melody. Julian's gaze lingered on Celeste, and in that moment, everything felt quieter, simpler. But they both knew the calm wouldn't last. The storm was far from over, and the path ahead was uncertain. Yet, for the first time, it felt like they were facing it together. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and cool as evening settled over Charleston General Hospital. The faint scent of petrichor drifted through an open window in Julian Hart's room, mixing with the calming fragrance of lavender from the vase on his bedside table. Julian sat propped up in bed, his thoughts swirling like the storm clouds that had just cleared. Across from him, Celeste Marlowe was carefully folding the blanket she'd straightened earlier, her quiet presence as steadying as the air after the rain. Julian broke the silence. Do you ever feel like your life is split into two parts? His voice was softer than usual, contemplative. The before and the after, like everything changes in a single moment. Celeste paused, her hands tightening around the edge of the blanket. She glanced at him, her heart twisting at the vulnerability in his expression. Yes, she said quietly, her voice tinged with emotion. I think everyone has a moment like that. It changes you. Julian nodded, his gaze distant. Before the accident, my life was so busy. Deals to close, events to attend, people to impress. I thought I was happy, but now, I don't know. What don't you know? Celeste asked gently, taking a tentative step closer. He met her eyes, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. If any of it really mattered. Her breath hitched, and she struggled to find the right words. Sometimes it takes losing everything to figure out what's truly important. Julian's eyes lingered on her, the weight of her words sinking in. But before he could respond, the door opened and Vivian Hale entered, her heels clicking against the floor with practiced precision. "Julian," she said brightly, though there was an edge to her voice, "I brought you something." She placed a sleek leather bag on the table and pulled out a collection of documents. "These are some plans for the house renovations we started before the accident. I thought looking at them might help you feel more like yourself again." Julian glanced at the papers, his expression unreadable. "Thanks," he said simply, though there was no enthusiasm in his voice. Vivian's eyes flicked to Celeste, who stood quietly by the wall. Her lips curled into a tight smile. "Oh, Celeste, I didn't see you there," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I hope you're not bothering Julian." "I'm not," Celeste replied, her voice steady despite the insult. Julian's gaze sharpened, his patience fraying. "She's not bothering me," he said firmly. "She's helping." Vivian stiffened, her polished demeanor cracking for a split second. "Of course," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "I just meant—" "Vivian," Julian interrupted, his tone cutting through her words. "Why are you really here?" Her smile faltered, and for a moment her mask slipped. "I'm here for you," she said, her voice softening, "to help you get back to your life, to our life." Julian leaned back against the pillows, his expression weary. "Our life," he repeated, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. "Vivian, I don't even know what that means anymore." "What are you saying?" Vivian's voice wavered, her composure unraveling. Julian hesitated, his eyes drifting to the window as though searching for an answer in the fading light. "I'm saying I need to figure out what I want," he said finally. "And I can't do that with you pushing plans and papers at me like nothing's changed." Vivian's breath hitched, her shock quickly morphing into anger. "So you're just throwing us away? After everything we've built?" "Built?" Julian's voice rose, frustration breaking through. "Vivian, what did we build? A life of appearances? A house full of things that don't mean anything?" Celeste's heart raced as she watched the confrontation unfold, feeling like an intruder in an intensely personal moment. She started to edge toward the door, but Julian's voice stopped her. "Stay," he said softly, his gaze locking onto hers. "Please." Vivian turned on her heel, her eyes narrowing as she glared at Celeste. "Is this about her?" she demanded, her voice trembling with fury. "This cleaner?" "That's enough," Julian said sharply, his voice firm. "Celeste has been more honest with me in the past week than you have in years." Vivian's face turned scarlet, her hands balling into fists. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "You think this, whatever this is, will last? She's not part of your world, Julian. She never will be." "I don't care about that," Julian shot back, his voice steady. "Maybe it's time for me to leave that world behind." Vivian's laugh was harsh, bitter. "You're delusional," she said, shaking her head. "You'll regret this." Without waiting for a response, she stormed out, the door slamming shut behind her. The sound echoed through the room, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Celeste stared at the door, her heart pounding. I should go," she said, her voice unsteady. "No," Julian said quickly, his tone softening. "Don't go." She turned to him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Julian, I don't want to make things harder for you." "You're not," he said firmly. "If anything, you're the only thing keeping me sane." Her breath caught, and she looked away, her cheeks flushing. "I'm just doing my job." "It's more than that," Julian said, his voice low but insistent. "You've been here for me, Celeste, when no one else was." She swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I just wanted you to know you weren't alone." Julian reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "And because of you, I wasn't." The sincerity in his words brought tears to her eyes, and for a moment the weight of everything, her fears, her hopes, her doubts, felt bearable. But even as her heart swelled with emotion, a small voice in the back of her mind reminded her of the obstacles that lay ahead. "Julian," she said softly, her voice trembling, whatever this is, it's complicated." "I know," he said, his gaze steady, "but I'm willing to fight for it, if you are." Her lips parted, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded, a silent promise that she would stand by him, no matter what. Outside the room, Vivian lingered in the hallway, her expression dark and calculating. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed a familiar number. "Damien," she said, her voice low and icy. "We need to talk. Now." The storm brewing in her heart hadn't subsided. It had only grown stronger, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to reclaim the life she believed was hers, no matter the cost. The late evening sky painted the hospital windows with hues of deep orange and gold, a fleeting calm before the chaos to come. Julian Hart sat upright in bed, his strength returning more each day, but tonight his thoughts were anything but calm. Across the room, Celeste Marlowe stood near the window, her silhouette bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. She hadn't said much since Vivian's dramatic exit earlier, and the silence was starting to weigh on both of them. Julian cleared his throat, breaking the quiet. "She's not coming back tonight." Celeste turned, startled. "Vivian?" Julian nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "She made her feelings pretty clear, didn't she?" Celeste hesitated, unsure of what to say. "She's angry," she said finally, her voice careful. "But I think she's just scared. Maybe this is all too much for her." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Scared? Vivian's never scared. If she is, it's because she's afraid of losing control, not me." Celeste's chest tightened at the pain in his voice. She moved closer, sitting in the chair by his bed. "Maybe she doesn't know how to handle this version of you," she said softly. "The one who's questioning everything." Julian met her gaze, his eyes searching hers for something he couldn't quite name. "And what about you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think I've changed?" Celeste's breath caught, her heart pounding. "I don't think it's about changing," she said carefully. "I think you're finding yourself." For a moment, the air between them felt charged, filled with words unspoken. Julian reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "You've been a part of that, Celeste," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "You've been my anchor." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away, her heart swelling with emotions she wasn't sure how to contain. "You don't owe me anything, Julian," she said quietly. "I just wanted to help." "You've done more than that," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You've reminded me what it feels like to be seen, to be cared for." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Celeste wanted to respond, to tell him how much he'd come to mean to her too. But before she could find the words, the door opened, and Dr. Serafina Wells stepped inside, her sharp gaze taking in the scene. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her tone brisk but not unkind. Celeste quickly stood, stepping back from the bed. "No, of course not." Serafina approached Julian, checking his chart and nodding in approval. "You're improving faster than I expected," she said. "But you need to be careful. Don't push yourself too hard." Julian nodded, though his thoughts seemed far away. "Thank you, Doctor." Wells. As Serafina turned to leave, she paused, her gaze lingering on Celeste. "You've been good for him," she said simply, her words carrying more weight than Celeste knew how to process. Outside the hospital, Vivian Hale paced along the sidewalk, her phone pressed to her ear. Her perfectly styled hair and tailored dress were immaculate, but her expression was anything but composed. "Damien!" she snapped, her voice low and venomous. "This isn't working. He's slipping further away, and that woman is always there." Damien Thornfield's smooth voice came through the line, calm and calculating. "I told you, Vivian. You're losing him because you're clinging too hard. You need to shift the narrative." "I don't need your lectures," she hissed. "I need solutions." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Damien spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "Then give him something to fight for. Remind him what he stands to lose if he walks away." Vivian's grip tightened on her phone, her jaw clenching. "And if he doesn't care?" "Then make him care," Damien said smoothly. "You're Vivian Hale. You don't lose." His words lit a fire in her chest, her resolve hardening. She ended the call without another word, her mind racing with the seeds of a plan. Julian thought he could redefine himself, leave everything behind. But Vivian wouldn't let him. Not without a fight. Back in the hospital, Julian and Celeste sat in a companionable silence, the weight of their earlier conversation still lingering in the air. Celeste hesitated, then spoke, her voice soft. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Julian turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "All the time," he admitted. "But for the first time, I don't have a clear answer. I've always known what was coming. Meetings, deals, the next step in my perfectly planned life. Now, I don't know. Maybe that's okay," Celeste said, her voice gentle. "Maybe not knowing means you have a chance to figure out what really matters." Her words settled over him and he nodded slowly. "And what about you?" he asked. "What matters to you, Celeste?" She hesitated, her eyes dropping to her lap. "I used to think it was about survival," she said quietly, "just getting through each day. But lately, I think it's about finding people who make you feel alive." Her voice trembled, and she looked away, afraid of revealing too much. But Julian reached for her hand again, his touch grounding her. "You've made me feel that, Celeste," he said softly, "for the first time in a long time." Her heart swelled, and for a moment it felt like the rest of the world had fallen away. But the moment was shattered by the sudden, sharp ring of Julian's phone. He frowned, reaching for it with his free hand. When he saw the caller ID, his expression darkened. "It's Vivian," he said, his voice heavy. Celeste pulled her hand back, standing quickly. "I should go." "No," Julian said, his tone firm. "Stay." She hesitated, her heart aching as she watched him answer the call. Vivian's voice was loud enough to hear even from across the room. "Julian," she said, her tone syrupy sweet. "I wanted to apologize for earlier. I overreacted." Julian's jaw tightened, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Vivian, this isn't—" "I have something important to tell you," she interrupted, her voice dropping into a dramatic hush. "Something that might change everything." Julian's brow furrowed, his gaze flicking to Celeste. "What is it?" Vivian paused, her silence heavy with anticipation. Then she spoke, her words landing like a bomb. "I'm pregnant, Julian." The room seemed to freeze. Julian's eyes widened, his breath catching in his chest. Celeste's face paled, her hands trembling at her sides. "What?" Julian finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You heard me," Vivian said, her tone victorious. "We're going to have a baby." Julian stared at the phone, his mind racing. The storm he thought had passed was far from over, and now it threatened to consume everything. The hospital was unusually quiet, the soft hum of machinery the only sound as Julian Hart sat in his room, staring blankly at the wall. Vivian's words from the night before hung in the air like an unrelenting fog. "I'm pregnant, Julian." He hadn't slept. He hadn't even moved much. The weight of her revelation had settled over him like a suffocating blanket, leaving him paralyzed. His thoughts churned endlessly, questions, doubts, fears, but no answers came. The door creaked open, and Julian's eyes flicked up to see Celeste Marlowe step inside. She hesitated, her hand lingering on the doorframe as though she could sense the heaviness in the room. "Julian," she said softly, her voice pulling him from the haze. "You look tired." He let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "That's one way to put it." Celeste moved closer, her heart aching at the sight of him. He looked more lost than she'd ever seen him, and it terrified her. "What happened?" she asked gently, sitting in the chair beside his bed. He ran a hand through his hair, his movements slow and deliberate. "Vivian called last night. She said—" His voice faltered and he looked away, as though the words were too heavy to say aloud. "She said what?" Celeste pressed, her voice steady, despite the dread creeping into her chest. Julian exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping. "She said she's pregnant." The words landed like a thunderclap, and Celeste's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, her mind racing. Are you sure it's true?" "I don't know," Julian admitted, his voice raw. "I don't know anything right now." Celeste's hands tightened in her lap, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. "What are you going to do?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. He shook his head, his gaze distant. "What can I do? If it's true, if she's carrying my child, I can't just walk away." The silence that followed was unbearable, stretching between them like a chasm. Celeste wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. She felt like she was falling, the connection she'd built with Julian slipping further out of reach with each passing second. "I'm sorry," Julian said suddenly, his voice trembling, "for dragging you into all of this. You didn't deserve—" "Stop," Celeste interrupted, her voice firm. "You didn't drag me into anything. I'm here because I want to be." Her words hung in the air, a quiet but powerful reminder of her unwavering support. Julian looked at her, his expression softening for the first time since the call. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That evening, Julian sat alone in his room, staring out the window at the city lights. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life was spiraling out of control, that every choice he made was leading him further away from the person he wanted to be. He thought about his parents, about the life they'd built and the values they'd instilled in him. Would they be proud of the man he'd become? Or would they see him as a hollow shell, chasing empty dreams? A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Vivienne standing in the doorway, her polished appearance as impeccable as ever. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Julian hesitated, then nodded. "Come in." She closed the door behind her, stepping cautiously into the room. For a moment she didn't speak, her gaze flitting around the room as though searching for something to anchor her. "Julian," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I know this has been overwhelming for both of us." He raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "That's one way to put it." "I'm sorry," she said. her tone earnest. "I shouldn't have blindsided you like that, but I didn't know how else to tell you." Julian leaned back against the pillows, studying her carefully. "Are you sure it's true?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. "Are you sure you're pregnant?" Vivian stiffened, her cheeks flushing. "Of course I'm sure," she said quickly, though there was a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "Why would I lie about something like that?" Julian didn't respond, his gaze piercing. The silence stretched between them, and for the first time, Vivian seemed unsure of herself. "I'm not trying to trap you, Julian," she said finally, her voice softer. I thought you deserved to know." Julian exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "If it's true," he said carefully, "then we'll figure out what comes next. But if it's not, Vivian, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not." Her lips parted as though she wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. She nodded reluctantly, her shoulders slumping. "I understand." The next morning, Julian asked to speak with Celeste alone. She entered his room hesitantly, her heart pounding as she met his gaze. He looked stronger today, more resolute, but there was still a shadow of uncertainty lingering behind his eyes. "Celeste," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I need to tell you something." She sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What is it?" He hesitated, then took a deep breath. "No matter what happens with Vivian, no matter what I find out, I want you to know how much you've meant to me. You've been my light in all of this, my constant." Her breath caught, tears pooling in her eyes. "Julian, I'm not asking you to wait for me," he continued, his voice trembling. "I don't even know if I deserve that, but I need you to know that you've changed me, Celeste, and I'll never forget that." She reached for his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "You deserve to be happy, Julian," she said, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Days turned into weeks, and the truth about Vivian's pregnancy eventually came to light. It had been a lie, a desperate attempt to hold on to a man she was losing. Julian confronted her, his anger tempered by a deep sadness at what they'd become. Vivian left, her presence fading like a storm that had finally run its course. And as the clouds cleared, Julian found himself standing on the edge of something new. He took slow but steady steps toward recovery, rediscovering who he was and what truly mattered. Through it all, Celeste remained by his side, her quiet strength a beacon of hope. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Julian and Celeste stood together on the hospital terrace, the world stretching out before them. He turned to her, his heart full of gratitude and something deeper, something that felt like the start of a new beginning. "Celeste," he said softly, his voice steady and sure. "Thank you for everything." She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't stop fighting," she said simply. "For yourself. For your happiness." He nodded, his chest swelling with determination. "I won't," he promised. "Not ever." And together they stepped forward, leaving the shadows of the past behind and embracing the promise of a brighter future.